Thanks for coming back, brothers and sisters. This is Blake with Defending Zion, and I today wanted to cover a topic that I included a little bit about in my presentation about the signs of the coming of the Son of Man, but I didn't include a lot of detail about it, and I think that there's still questions surrounding it, so I thought I'd create a separate presentation about it, and the topic is the latter-day King of Assyria. So, why is it important to discuss this latter-day King of Assyria, and why is it important for us to talk about evil in general? Brigham Young said that it is important to study evil and its consequences, and that the Lord himself understands the evil and the good. Why should we not likewise understand them? We should. Why? To know how to choose the good and refuse the evil, which we cannot do unless we understand the evil as well as the good. And he further said, I do not wish to convey the idea that it is necessary to commit evil in order to obtain this knowledge. And as a second witness here, President James E. Faust testified that since Satan is the author of all evil in the world, it would therefore be essential to realize that he is the influence behind the opposition to the work of God. So here we have two prophets that are testifying of the importance of understanding evil and how it comes about and how Satan works in the world. Now there is a warning to this. President Faust mentioned in that same address that he gave, it's a great address, The Great Imitator. I'd recommend you go read the whole thing. But in that he gave a warning that basically it's not good to practice, or it's not good practice to become intrigued by Satan and his mysteries. No good can come from getting close to evil. Like playing with fire, it is too easy to get burned. And President Joseph F. Smith said that the knowledge of sin tempteth to its commission. The only safe course is to keep well distanced from him and any of his wicked activities or nefarious practices. The mischief of devil worship, sorcery, casting spells, witchcraft, voodooism, black magic, and all other forms of demonism should be avoided like the plague. So here there's a difference between choosing to adopt these wicked activities or practices and studying the tactics. Clearly there's a difference, and what these prophets are encouraging us to do is to understand how Satan operates in the world, what tactics he uses, and how he goes about trying to tempt people. That's the thing that's important to understand. So, before we actually get into the latter-day King of Assyria, it's important to have an understanding of the ancient kings of Assyria. Now, there were many kings of Assyria, but there's three primarily that are talked about in the Bible. Each of them played an important role in shaping the future and the destiny of the tribes of Israel. So, first off, the Tiglath-Pileser II. He reigned from 747 to 734. He began conquests into the kingdom of Israel. So he took certain areas in Gilead, Galilee, and the area where Naphtali was located at. He made an alliance with Ahaz, who was the king of Judah at that time, against Rezin and Pekah. And those two kings were kings that were in the north in Israel and in Syria. He also conquered Damascus, which was in Syria. And then he eventually turned against King Ahaz. The second one is King Shalmaneser. So at the time that Shalmaneser was going forth and conquering, the king in Israel was Hoshea. And basically he took Hoshea and his people into captivity. And then he conquers Samaria, which is where we get the Samaritans from. And basically they become tribute. They become slaves, prisoners, if you will. And then lastly, and the one that's talked about most, especially in Isaiah, is Sennacherib. I don't really know how to say that. But he conquered much of the land of Judah, took many of its cities, and then he has these interactions. He sends these letters and these messengers to King Hezekiah, who was the king of Judah at the time in Jerusalem, and basically says, join me or die. And then we learn that Hezekiah, through basically miracles happening, is able to save his people in Jerusalem, and the Lord destroys a great host of the Assyrian army. And then sometime later, Sennacherib returns to Assyria and is eventually slain by his own sons. So now that we have an understanding of that, we kind of understand generally the history of it. It's also important to understand what was it that made the Assyrians so dangerous. And this is actually from the Old Testament student manual. It says, the most vital part of the Assyrian government was its army. Warfare was a science to the leaders of Assyria. Infantry, chariots, cavalry, sappers, armor, all made from iron, siege machines and battering rams, they were all developed or perfected by the Assyrians. They focused on strategy and tactics, and these were all understood by the Assyrian officers and leaders in the army. But we also know that there was things in the Assyrian Empire that caused its downfall. Besides a general wickedness and a refusal to worship the God of Israel. We learn that the Assyrian Empire was destroyed in part because the qualities of body and character that had helped to make the Assyrian armies invincible were being weakened by the very victories that they won. So in each of the victories that they had, it was often the strongest and the bravest who died during the battle, while the infirm and the cautious survived to multiply their kind. It was a dysgenic or a biologically defective process that perhaps made for civilization by weeding out the more brutal types, but it undermined the biological basis upon which Assyria had risen to power. So the extent of her conquest had helped to weaken her. So, essentially the way in which they made war weakened their empire. Not only had they depopulated all the surrounding areas to basically feed and use and worship for the god of war, but they had also brought back captives to their land, and all these captives were destitute and basically had lost their national identity, and so it really didn't create a cohesive national unity in the Assyrian Empire, because you had all these different groups of people that were being conquered and then brought back, and then it was kind of just a melting pot, for lack of a better term, in the empire. And then these same people were then used as part of the army. So, overall it just wasn't a very good structure, the way that it was set up. And that was what caused its downfall. So with the history in mind and an understanding of the empire itself, how it operated, how it was so focused on war, let's turn now to the latter-day king of Assyria. And it's important to understand that this king of Assyria is a real person who will perform, so in the future, will perform an evil and destructive work. We can come to know who he is, what his mission and his tactics are, through the prophecies of both ancient and modern prophets. So that is what I've chosen to focus this particular presentation and study on, is the prophecies of ancient prophets as well as modern prophets. So the first and perhaps the greatest prophet to prophesy about this latter-day king of Assyria is the prophet Isaiah. And I've listed a bunch of key references in Isaiah of chapters and verses where Isaiah specifically talks about this king of Assyria. There's a lot of reading material here. As you can see also, there's the corresponding chapters in the Book of Mormon. I'm going to post this presentation, a copy of this PowerPoint, on the description so that you can actually take time to stop and to go through and read all of these. What I've done in the presentation is I've basically gone through and I did a personal study of this where I read all these verses, I searched for all these verses throughout Isaiah, and then I gleaned the important tactics that the king of Assyria uses, his characteristics, the methods of battle, the way that he attacks the saints, and then what his eventual outcome is in the latter days. So I've condensed it here so that it's a little bit easier to digest. So first of all, Isaiah compares the king of Assyria to a bee. And if you take that bee as a symbol, you understand that the bee has certain characteristics, right? So the bee, a bee colony has a queen, right? And a bunch of other bees, worker bees, help support that queen. And essentially, without the queen or the ruler, the rest of the bees die. So we can understand that this king of Assyria, he is going to be a ruler, and without him, his followers will have nothing to unite them, and they will die too. Bees also, we know, live in primarily in hives or in collectives, and all of the bees work together to gather everything that's needed for themselves and for the colony. And in like manner, this latter-day king of Assyria will be gathered together with other people in collectives or in groups where they can share the spoils of war, and they can basically live off of the destruction of other people and the theft of other people. We also learn from Isaiah that he works with the fly in Egypt. Now, in one of my other videos, I've talked about how Egypt is kind of a code name or a code word that Isaiah uses to describe America. So whenever you see Egypt in Isaiah, think America. So who is this fly in Egypt? Well, when we think about a fly, what is a fly? A fly is a parasite. It scavenges for food and can transmit diseases or sicknesses. If we think about it in this latter-day context, we realize that the fly itself is not committed to America. It's a traitor to America because it is working with the king of Assyria. This fly is actively working to not only dismantle our system of government, but also working to dismantle our Constitution. The king of Assyria, we're told, also goes against a hypocritical nation. And if you think about America, where we preach certain values that are enshrined in our Constitution, and yet the way that we live our lives is completely opposite of that, you can see how America can be considered a hypocritical nation. We know and learn that this king of Assyria is an invader, and he actually invades America and conquers America, and Isaiah says especially the land beyond the river. So we don't know exactly what river he's talking about here, but one of the rivers in America, we know that he will invade and conquer most of that area. And we're told that this invasion will happen like a flood. So floods are chaotic. They take things, they churn them up, they throw them around, they displace things. So he is going to create chaos amidst chaos. We know that he and his army fight with arrows and bows, and that is how they desolate the land. Now you take that manner of warfare, arrows and bows typically are associated with distance, right? So there will be distance that this king of Assyria and his followers will perhaps attack from secret locations that aren't expected from a distance. There perhaps won't be right up in our face. Maybe they'll be hiding, things that we'll have to discover where they're at and reveal their location. We know that just like in ancient times when the Assyrians conquered Palestine, they first took captive Ephraim and Syria before they attacked Judah. Now, if we're to find correlations between ancient Ephraim and Syria and Judah with something in the modern world, I believe we can look at Ephraim as essentially worldly Israel. So the king of Assyria is going to attack those that are worldly, that are steeped in idolatry, that are more concerned about things, about money, and obtaining things. And we also know that they attack Syria at the same time. We can look at Syria really as the rivals of covenant Israel, because essentially they were rivals. The only thing that really, united them was kind of a disdain or a envy or a jealousy against Judah. We're told in the scriptures in Isaiah that there's an envy and there's a jealousy between Ephraim and Judah that develops throughout history, and that in the last days that eventually that envy will be done away with, and that the tribes will eventually be reunited. But at this point, they're still not on the friendliest of terms. So if you think of that, if you think of Judah as covenant Israel, those that are worldly, that don't take their covenants and promises they've made with God seriously, or those that oppose Christ or worship perhaps a false version of Christ, you can see how that they would kind of be jealous of, or would have some sort of an animosity towards covenant Israel. Now, after he goes through and destroys and takes captive these two groups, Ephraim and Syria, we know that he will actually pass through and destroy wicked and apostate Judah. So those who are of the covenant, those who are members of the church that have apostatized, the king of Assyria will also take them captive. And they won't be safe. Once the king of Assyria has done this conquering, he'll have great pride in himself. He'll feel the boast because of his accomplishments. And so he will attempt to go against the New Jerusalem and the city of Zion that will be established in Jackson County, Missouri. We know that he eventually doesn't actually prevail. We know that the glory of God will be there, and that will be something that dissuades the king of Assyria as well as the Assyrian people from attacking New Jerusalem. God will literally step in and intervene in miraculous ways. We learn from Isaiah as well that the king of Assyria seeks to create alliances, and he does this by offering promises of security or promises of plenty. So in conjunction with this invasion, we know that there will be a time of famine where food will be scarce, and so you can just imagine when that's the case, this offer of having enough to eat and drink is going to be something that will be so tempting for people that they'll decide to give in, right? They'll decide to join the enemy and create an alliance. And that will prove their destruction. The king of Assyria is a conqueror, and then he places those conquered people into captivity. They then join his kingdom and his army, basically to be his prisoners, his slaves, and to do whatever he requests and whatever he asks. So in a way, he sets himself up as a false god that seeks to dominate and rule the world. Isaiah also tells us that this king of Assyria will come from far. So he is not going to be someone that is native to America. And he will rule over princes. So there will be a structure that will be in place whereby he rules. And in a way, I guess you can say that he will imitate legitimate representative rule. He'll, try to emulate or imitate what God's kingdom is, right? Where certain men, prophets, represent the Lord Jesus Christ, there will surely be princes that will also seek to be legitimate, I guess, emissaries or messengers of the king of Assyria. It's also interesting that in Isaiah, he talks about how these princes aren't necessarily princes in a kingly or a governmental sense. So it's not like they've been popularly elected or they have any governmental authority. It's better to think of them as, like the Gadianton robbers, right? So they had their structure of ruling among themselves, but it wasn't a legitimate ruling. It was just the structure that they created amongst themselves to be able to deal with, all the threats that they had, or to fulfill the purposes that they wanted to fulfill. We're told that the king of Assyria has a stout heart, meaning that he's prideful. If you actually look down at the footnote, stout heart refers to being prideful. So he's a very prideful person. You can see how, a lot of these conquests that are going to occur would cause him to feel pride and to feel as if he is invincible. And he'll attempt to create fear in people by boasting about these conquests. In Isaiah, the king of Assyria taunts Hezekiah, saying, I've destroyed all these other people and their gods weren't there to save them, so what makes you think that you're going to be any different? That's how the king of Assyria is going to work. We know that he's going to plunder people, so he's going to steal. He's going to take things by theft. And he's going to destroy the bounds of the people. So one of the major goals of the king of Assyria is to destroy state, national, and international borders and boundaries, to basically get rid of national unity or state unity, and to set up his own system of a unified, kingdom or empire. Now, as I talked about in the beginning, remember, that is what actually led to the downfall of the Assyrian Empire. There was no cohesive national unity. So that's something that's actually going to work against him. We know that he's going to work prudently, which also means judiciously or modestly, or discreetly. And by discreet, we mean that he uses privacy and silence to accomplish his purposes. So when you hear that word discreet, think secret combinations. All of these things are going to be like backroom deals that are going to take place, and that's how most of the work's going to happen. It's not going to be in your face, this is what we're doing. It's going to be through secret, silent means. We know that he's going to deny God, is using him as an instrument to accomplish his own purposes. The king of Assyria, because of his pride, thinks that all these things happen, all the conquering, all the destruction happens because of his own power. But that's just not the case. God is using this to chasten his people, to prepare them for Zion, and to prepare them for the glory and the coming of Christ. So that's the real purpose behind why God is allowing the king of Assyria to do this. We know that there will be many of the house of Israel that will have relied upon him, and they will have joined these secret combinations. But it's also important to remember that there will be some people, despite this, that will see the error of their ways, and they'll repent before it's too late. And this is an important part of the missionary work that will happen in this difficult tribulation. So as I mentioned earlier, he is going to attempt to, destroy basically the New Jerusalem or the city of Zion. He's also going to send messages of taunting to Zion and encourage them to not rely upon America or upon their God to save them. And again, he uses his prior conquests to do this. Now, with this conquering that happens, obviously we know that the city of New Jerusalem will be protected during this time. But there will be others in Zion, so in America, that will be gathered together in other stakes that the king of Assyria will smite. Isaiah specifically says he'll smite them with a rod. So when I think of that, that's a key word that takes me back to Moses and the children of Israel in Egypt. What was their life like in Egypt? Well, they had burdens placed upon them, and they were basically servants. They were slaves. So that is what the king of Assyria is going to do, in a sense, to those that are gathered in other areas of Zion. We know that the Lord will still honor his covenants and protect the people, but again, part of the purpose of king of Assyria is a chastening. So to get the people in Zion to be obedient to God in all things. That's the purpose. We also know the king of Syria is going to lift up his staff like Pharaoh and his magicians did in ancient Egypt. So you can be sure that the king of Assyria will, perform wonders and miracles in some way that seek to imitate God and the miracles that he does. Now, what eventually happens to him? Well, we learn that his followers are going to be slaughtered in a manner that's similar to the slaughter of Midian. I'm not going to go into that. That was actually in the timeline that I have already posted. But if you want to study that further, that's in Judges chapter 7. We know that his princes will be humbled. So they'll choose to either humble themselves and repent, or they will be killed themselves. And the king of Assyria himself, we know that he's going to return to his own land, and he will be killed there by his own family or by trusted associates. And that is basically the downfall of how he ends once the king of Assyria is dead, like I said, because they act in a bee-like manner. The rest of his followers also will, basically be destroyed, or they will go off and they will follow a new leader, which is the Antichrist, which I actually did talk quite a bit about in that presentation. So I'm not going to do a separate one on the Antichrist. All right, the second ancient prophet to talk about this latter-day king of Assyria is Nahum. Okay, when was the last time any of you read the book of Nahum? And be honest, probably never. Am I right? Well, you should, and here's why. Nahum actually talks quite a bit about the king of Assyria and tells us, he confirms a lot of the stuff that Isaiah says, obviously, but there's other things that he teaches about the king of Assyria that's important to know. So first, he imagines evil plans and designs against the Lord. So his designs are basically to work against whatever the Lord is trying to accomplish. We know that his schemes with many people are going to be in secret or in a quiet manner. So again, that secret combination. And we know that he is going to burden and to yoke the covenant people of God. And again, that is for purposes of chastening them so that they can learn obedience to God in all things. We also learn that he will kill and destroy those who fight against him. So while he promises safety and security, he will basically eat his own. He will destroy his own people. He will sacrifice his own people to accomplish his own desires. Nahum also compares him to a lion that preys upon people and then hides in dens. So again, there's a certain secrecy that's involved in all of this. He sees people as expendable. Basically, people can be used to accomplish his designs. And just like Isaiah talked about, he will use messengers to spread fear amongst the people in America. We know that his ultimate downfall is that he'll be killed by the sword, and that he will not be healed. So while some people think that he will be invincible, he is just a man and he will be killed. We also learn that he actually will create a system of what Nahum calls wicked merchants to accomplish his purposes. So part of his domination is going to come through economic means, through setting up a system of buying and selling that is going to be rigged in such a way that it will basically just, economically destroy everyone while making himself rich at the same time. We also know that his followers are not going to be loyal to him. As Nahum says, they're going to be like grasshoppers or locusts that when the sun rises and gets hot during the hot part of the day, that they go and they flee to the shadows. So they're going to seek to be hidden in the shadows, and they're not really going to be loyal to him at all. Okay, the third prophet that talks about the king of Assyria is John the Revelator. And some of this material I have already covered before in my Beasts of Revelation 13 presentation. So if this looks familiar, it is. I kind of just copied and pasted a lot of the slides, but I did kind of change some of the stuff on here. So in Revelation 13, that's where we learn about the identity, the powers, and the work of the king of Assyria. And John, in Revelation 13, identifies him as the one who is. So there's this beast with 7 heads, right? And one of these beast's heads is wounded to death. If you look at the actual translation, it says one of the heads appears to be killed or maimed with a mortal wound. And then mortal wound is translated as a blow, a stripe, a wound, an affliction, or a plague. And we're told that this mortal wound, air quotes, is healed or cured. Now, I'm going to argue that this healing of this first beast's head is only an illusion that's meant to deceive the world. This head of the first beast will actually be killed, and then that's what gives rise to the second beast, or the Antichrist. So basically, the Antichrist just sweeps in and takes his place. So, there's some other scriptures in Revelation 17 that talk about and identify this first beast's head as the one who is. And the angels, when they're actually talking and describing this, they tell the truth, right? So it is a figure or a person who is not. So he is, he dies. Don't be deceived by the illusion that this first beast's head continues on, because the king of Assyria will die. Now, part of this work that the king of Assyria is going to do is obviously going to be fighting against God. John says that each of these heads, these 7 heads, had the name of blasphemy on them. So we know that names represent a fundamental essence of something. And we also know that to blasphemy is to speak offensively against God or against sacred things. So the fundamental essence of the king of Assyria, his main purpose, is to speak offensively against God or against sacred things. And to accomplish this purpose, he's going to be given special powers from Satan. We know that he'll have a mouth that's given to him to speak great things and to speak blasphemies. So, in a sense, he will be a charismatic kind of figure. We know that the first beast is given power to continue for 42 months or 3.5 years. Now, I don't think that the king of Assyria is going to reign or dominate for this long. If you actually look at Isaiah, there's a specific sign that Isaiah gives in regards to this king of Assyria that shows that his rule is going to be closer to about 3 years. And you can look at Isaiah 20, verse 4 for that information. Satan's also going to give him power to make war against the saints and to overcome them. We've talked a lot about that already. That's his main purpose, is to basically destroy the saints that won't stay faithful to God, and destroy whoever for his own purposes and for his own means. And his domination is going to be among all kindreds, tongues, and peoples. You know, America is a great melting pot. There's so many different cultures here, right? So many different people and tongues. And, you know, he isn't going to be just going after one specific group, but he's going to be going, conquering all, just like the ancient king of Assyria. In Revelation 13:6, we learn a little bit more about the work. We talked about blasphemy, right? That's obvious. What is he going to blaspheme against? Well, he's going to blaspheme against God, the name of God, God's tabernacle, which kind of, that connects it to not only the temples that will be in America already, the ones that are currently built, but it also seems to suggest that at least some of the temples in New Jerusalem will be built. And then he also blasphemes those that dwell in heaven, and he makes war with the saints. So those are ancient prophets. What about our modern prophets? Well, Ezra Taft Benson is famous for his sermons and teachings about secret combinations. And as I read a couple of these talks about, modern Yantans or modern secret combinations, I just saw the similarities between what the ancient prophets said about the king of Assyria and what President Benson taught. So let me share a few thoughts from him, just as another witness that President Benson knew how the king of Assyria would come about and how he would establish his rule and how he would seek to overthrow God's kingdom. So he says, this is in a 1988 General Conference address, he says, "I testify that wickedness is rapidly expanding in every segment of our society. It is more highly organized, more cleverly disguised, and more powerfully promoted than ever before. Secret combinations, lusting for power, gain, and glory are flourishing." Aren't those the exact same things that I've talked about the king of Assyria is going to want? "A secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world." So just like the king of Assyria, this secret combination that President Benson's talking about is going to seek to get rid of those national, state, international boundaries, right? Seeking to create disunity. But in doing that, it is going to prove to be its downfall. And this is from a separate address that President Benson gave in 1961 when David O. McKay was president of the church. He said that in the ancient American civilization there was no word which struck greater terror to the hearts of the people than the name of the Gadiantans. It was a secret political party which operated as a murder cult. Its object was to infiltrate legitimate government, plant its officers in high places, and then seize power and live off the spoils appropriated from the people. That sounds a lot like what the King of Assyria is going to do. Him and his followers are going to live off these spoils that they take through theft, and that's how they're going to support themselves. These Gadiantans would start out as a small group of dissenters, and then by using secret oaths with the threat of death for defectors, it would gradually gain a chokehold on the political and economic life of whole civilizations. So as I talked about, it's not only a political thing. He's not coming to just conquer land. He's coming to make himself wealthy and rich, to take all that he can. President Benson, as a prophet of God, also gives us 6 ways that we can fight against this modern secret combination. Now, I know that there's going to be some people that are going to listen to this, and they're going to think that there's obviously political slants to what President Benson says and what he said. Remember here that as he's speaking in General Conference, he is speaking as a prophet. He is speaking as God's mouthpiece. So to merely dismiss what he says as political or conservative is to dismiss the words of God and what God would have us know about this secret combination. So with that in mind, let's talk about the 6 ways that we can fight against the King of Assyria. First, we should become informed about communism, socialism, and Americanism. And what better way can one become informed than by first studying the inspired words of the prophets and using that as a foundation against which to test all other material. This is in keeping with the prophet Joseph Smith's motto that when the Lord commands, do it. So first, let's gain an understanding, a foundation of all of these things, socialism, what those things are, but also let's understand what God's plan is, what the prophets have revealed about what the law of consecration is. Those things are important as a base to understand. We should also know why paternalism, collectivism, or unnecessary federal supervision will hold our standard of living down and reduce productivity, just as it has in every country where it has been tried. We should also know why the communist leaders consider socialism the high road to communism. 2. We should accept the command of the Lord and treat socialistic communism as the tool of Satan. We should follow the counsel of the President of the Church, who was then David O. McKay, and resist the influence and policies of the socialist communist conspiracy wherever they are found, in the schools, in the churches, in governments, in unions, in businesses, and in agriculture. Third, we should help those who have been deceived or who are misinformed to find the truth. Unless each person who knows the truth will stand up and speak up, it is difficult for the deceived or confused citizen to find his way back. So if there's only one message that's going out, and there's no counter message to that, then people that are deceived will never know the truth. So it's incumbent upon us to first obtain that truth and then to share it. Fourth, we should not make the mistake of calling people communist just because they happen to be helping the communist cause or the socialist cause. Thousands of patriotic Americans, including a few Latter-day Saints, have helped the communists without realizing it. So remember what I said about how some of the House of Israel would be part of these secret combinations, and some of them would eventually get to a point where they realized they were part of the combination and they would seek to repent and to basically get out of it. Here, President Benson is telling us the same thing, that there's some Latter-day Saints that have helped the communists, that have helped this modern secret combination without realizing it. Others have knowingly helped without actually joining the party. The remedy is to avoid name-calling, but point out clearly and persuasively how they are helping the communists. Fifth, each priesthood holder should use his influence in the community to resist the erosion process which is taking place. And I would actually say it has taken place. At this point, it almost feels like a bygone conclusion. The erosion of the moral fabric of our community is decaying and is dying. This erosion process which is taking place in our political and economic life. This priesthood holder should use the political party of his choice to express his evaluation of important issues. He should see that his party is working to preserve freedom, not destroy it. He should join responsible local groups interested in promoting freedom and free competitive enterprise, in studying political issues, appraising the voting records and proposed programs, and writing to members of Congress, promoting good men in public office and women, and scrutinizing local, state, and federal agencies to see that the will of the people is being carried out. This priesthood holder should not wait for the Lord's servants to give instruction for every detail once they have announced the direction in which the priesthood should go. Each member should exercise prayerful judgment and then act. So we've got an election coming up, right, in the United States, less than a month away. And I have seen so much talk back and forth about Trump this or Biden that. And, some people say, well, if you're not voting for Trump, then it's a vote for Biden or vice versa. Or, some people are apathetic and they don't even want to vote, right? They don't want to take a side. In all of this, the prophets have always counseled us to make it a matter of prayerful judgment, to evaluate the candidates, the issues. The church doesn't officially endorse any political party. They will speak out on issues affecting morality, which we've seen in the past with gay marriage, with abortion, and with euthanasia. But they won't endorse a political party or any candidates. So the judgment is left to us. We're to decide. We're to, evaluate all the information and then act and make that a matter of prayer. Basically, we just need to be good citizens, right? We need to be informed citizens. Sixth, and most important of all, he says, each member of the priesthood should set his own house in order. This should include regular family prayer, remembering especially our government leaders. President Ballard gave an entire talk in the most recent General Conference about this specific thing, about praying for the leaders of our nations. 2, getting out of debt. 3, seeing that each member of the family understands the importance of keeping the commandments. 4, seeing that the truth is shared with members of the family, with neighbors, and with associates. 5, seeing that each member is performing his duties in the priesthood, in the auxiliary organizations, in the temple, and in the civic life of the community. 6, seeing that every wage earner in the home is a full tithe payer and fulfilling other obligations in financial support of the kingdom. And lastly, providing a 1-year supply of essentials. So this message, I will remind you, was given in 1961. The prophets of God have testified in this last General Conference about these exact same things, that these things need to be taking place in our homes right now. Members need to be preparing and doing these things right now. And these are really the things that are going to protect us from the king of Assyria. If there's economic disaster that comes because of this king of Assyria, what a blessing it will be to have a 1-year supply of food. What a blessing it will be to not have any debt. It's amazing how the prophets of God testify of these things, and these things are literally what is going to save us from this destruction. So that's it. That is the king of Assyria. Exhaustive. Kind of a more than I had thought I would learn or understand about this particular person that's coming in the future. I pray that the Spirit will touch your hearts to help you to understand why this is such an important topic. And I also pray that the Spirit will touch your heart to do these things that the prophets of God have been telling us to do, to prepare for this time when the king of Assyria will come and he will seek to destroy the kingdom of God in this land. I testify that these things are true, and I do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.